Okay, so thanks for attending this webinar or info session. It's really a chance for us to get to know you a little bit or get to present ourselves a little bit to you. It's being an online program. We don't have a lot of opportunities to meet and greet with a lot of folks. So we're going to try to do more of these so that people can get a feel for what we're about and actually hear a live voice, if you will, instead of just reading lots and lots of text on the website, which can be frustrating, I know. This presentation will be pretty casual. If you have a question, just go ahead and ask. I'll be able to see it right away. And I might save it to the end if it's not relevant to what I'm talking about right now at that time, or I might go ahead and answer it. So we'll keep it pretty casual. Go ahead and just raise your hand or just ask the question if something comes to your mind. So this presentation is titled How to Launch a Career in Software Development. I guess I should add, we're going to talk about specifically how to use what we built at Launch School to accomplish that goal. The agenda is going to be a pretty short presentation on software development, what employers are looking for, and we'll end it with how Launch School works. And then we'll save the second half of this meeting or presentation for questions. I've gotten a lot of questions in the sign up form, and I've gotten a lot of questions just over time through emails. And also, if you have any questions, of course, just ask it in this presentation. So we'll try to keep it casual, informal, and somewhat fast-paced if we can. So this presentation is, usually we have presentations for our students who are already in the program, and we have a much better idea of where they are, what their baseline knowledge is, and we can cater the presentation to that specific profile. This webinar is a little bit more open, so it's open to anybody to sign up. We advertise it to sort of our prep course, which has a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences. So some of it may, if you're an existing programmer, or this may seem repetitive or obvious to you. So just bear with me. This presentation is meant for sort of a wider audience. So we'll start off with very generically, what is software development? It's not just, building iOS apps or building web apps. Software is literally everywhere you look. There's software in light bulbs nowadays. I saw a tweet the other day that said, I can't reset my light bulb's password. So there's software everywhere you look, whether you know it or not. It's in cars, it's in televisions, air conditioning units, those digital displays. And obviously what we're familiar with, which is mobile phones, our native applications, and our web applications. And very generically, programmers write software. So there are as many different types of programmers as there are different types of software. In other words, if you meet somebody on the street and you're a web developer and this other person says they're a programmer, you may not even be able to speak to each other in terms of what you're doing, just because there are so many different types of programmers out there. And to reflect the different types of programmers, there are equally a large number of programming languages. Now, I just grabbed the top 15 here. This is pretty recent, from December 2015. But there are hundreds of programming languages. And there are certain families of programming languages. And there are certain languages that are catered to a specific niche. For example, in enterprise software, mostly we're talking about Java or .NET, right? For embedded systems or software that talks to hardware, it's more C. For web applications, it could be Python, PHP, JavaScript, Perl, Ruby, right? And of course, assembly language is its own thing that is still very popular to this day. And on. You can see down there on 14 and 15, there's Swift and Objective-C, which are languages for building iOS apps, specifically iPad and iPhone apps. And just for that particular niche, it's already pretty popular. Top 15 language. So it's kind of hard to maybe choose just if you have no programming background. You say, I want to be a programmer. I heard that the career is good, the money's good, and most programmers that I talk to seem to enjoy their work. You wouldn't necessarily just go over here and pick a language and start learning it. You need to have some constraints around what you want to do, because there's just too many different types of programming languages. So what should you learn? What language should you learn? What types of applications should you build? It really depends on what you want to do. Right. So here I wrote down some general guidelines. Right. This is very fluid, but general guidelines. If you want to build mobile apps, 5 or 6 years ago, the story was very different. But today, it's basically two major platforms, right? iOS and Android. iOS is learning Swift or Objective-C, probably Swift if you're learning today, if you're starting today, or Android, which is Java-based. If you're interested in building large infrastructure software at companies that require large infrastructure, like banks and hospitals and Google and Facebook, maybe a lower level language or a concurrent language like Erlang. If you want to work on big data applications, maybe Python, Hadoop, probably more statistics, less about language and more about maybe modeling and data analysis. If you are interested in working enterprise software, Oracle, IBM, HP, these type of big companies, you probably need to learn Java or .NET, or sometimes they have their own proprietary stack. For example, Salesforce uses a language they invented called Apex, which is very similar to Java. If you want to build dynamic web applications, right, you have to learn the backend and the front end. Backend, pick a language. Front end, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So that kind of developing an idea of what you want to do informs in what direction you should learn and what the language and the stack that you should try to master. So for us at Launch School, and you're here, probably is because you want to build web applications. And so it's important to sort of understand that. So I get a lot of questions like, if I take your program, I want to build WhatsApp or Snapchat. These are mobile applications, right? We will teach you how to build responsive web applications that you will be able to use on a mobile device, but they will not be native mobile applications. So very different set of technologies. Just be aware of that. So web applications is, in my opinion, at a very interesting spot because it's consumer facing, right? And so it has a natural appeal to everyone. You can build an application and show it to your friends and have it be immediately useful, right? If you work on infrastructure software or if you work on software that powers Cisco routers, it's not something that you can necessarily show to friends and family. Web applications are also based upon open standards, which means that one company cannot, well, this is not entirely true, but it's hard for one company to influence or just totally stop supporting that language or framework, for example. So it's based on open standards, and the idea behind that is that there's some longevity to it. If a company goes bankrupt, the open standard is still available. And the other thing is, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in the last several years, there's been a lot of talk about, quote unquote, the cloud. Nobody says web applications anymore. People talk about the cloud. That's just web applications, right? So the enterprise there's sort of a revolution or evolution of enterprise software. It's everyone's talking about the cloud now. So if you've ever heard the phrase software is eating the world, then web applications is eating the future of software or is the future of software, right? This is one of the main drivers behind companies like Salesforce or Workday. They're basically attacking enterprise software by using a subscription service, selling a subscription service, right? So if you're a hospital, Salesforce or Workday is going into these hospitals and saying, well, instead of installing these complicated HR systems or customer management systems, use our web-hosted software, and you pay $50 per user per year, something like that. So web applications, aka the cloud, taken over everything. Obviously, it's been popular in consumer software, but it's definitely taken over the enterprise space as well. And so that's what we do. We teach you how to build modern web applications and from first principles. I think that's important. That's a differentiator, I think, between how we teach and how perhaps some other programs teach. And I'll talk about later why learning from first principles is really important. And it's a little bit harder, I would say. It takes longer, but it's absolutely critical, in our opinion, obviously. So two major sort of aspects of web application development. There's the back end, and then there's the front end. right? The backend and server-side code, usually in language. I've simplified this quite a bit. It's a lot more complicated, but basically we're processing requests, interfacing with other applications perhaps, interfacing with a third-party API perhaps. We're interfacing with a persistent data stores, right? It could be a relational database. It could be a Redis store. It could be a NoSQL data store. It could be anything. Mainly working with data. And the front end, it's for the most part, we're dealing with client-side code, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, browser and cross-browser concerns. Now, the front-end world has gotten a lot more complicated because the demands on UI and UX has increased a lot, right? So when you use something like Facebook, people are used to that experience, right? When they click on the like button, it works correctly without refreshing the whole page. So when we build web applications nowadays, people are sort of experiencing or expecting that Facebook experience. So the demands on front end is quite high now. The expectations is quite high now. But two major parts of web application development. These are the two sort of major things you need to learn. So if software is eating the world and web applications eating software, then we can kind of look at the future of software, right? So how's the outlook for developers? Now, if you're on this call, you probably already sold. So I pulled maybe 4 or 5 different quotes and statistics. I ended up with just one because I didn't want to belabor the point here. But Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's going to be a major shortage of software developers going forward. In any field, we're all subject to the whims of the market, whether it's nursing, pharmacy, accounting, lawyer, doctor, whatever it is. But the outlook for software developers is just shortage for the next foreseeable future, just because more and more fields, every single field is in need of software expertise. So that makes it hard for us to understand what it takes to become a software developer. So I get this question a lot. It's like, what do I need to learn to get a job? And because there is just such demand for software programming skills across the board, across industries, across different types of companies, there's no standard. There's not one test that we're all aiming for to pass. And if you pass that test, then you're a software programmer. The bar, it varies a lot. If you have a little bit of HTML and CSS knowledge, you can get a job nowadays, right? You can get a job nowadays. So we get into a lot of this in one of the assignments in the Launch School orientation course, which is part of the preparatory phase, which is completely free. So if you haven't seen that, I highly suggest you check it out. Again, you just have to register and get there, and there's no cost. And I didn't want to spend maybe 40 minutes talking about this, but the idea is that it's very difficult to say for sure, okay, this is the bar that is going to get you a job, because getting a job is actually quite a low bar. Our curriculum at Launch School overshoots most bars, not all, right? Not for example, if you want to be an infrastructure engineer at Google or something like that. But if you're a marketing agency looking for someone who can build a little UI or something like that, that's no problem. All right, so this is I think the most confusing part about people who are looking to get into the industry, looking for a job, is what is the bar? What is it that I need to learn in order to get a job? Okay, so instead of asking what are employers looking for, right? So we try to ask, what are the top employers looking for? And the goal here is to build a curriculum that will make you competitive for the good jobs. And if you go through that journey, then you'll be naturally competitive for some of the, I don't want to say lesser jobs, but some of the jobs that require less technical or programming expertise. But the commonality, I would say, between sort of the top employers when we talk to employers one is communication ability. And this is, I can't overstate the importance of this enough, is being able to speak clearly, being able to communicate your ideas and have debate. And this is the key, is being able to debate with people without sort of being defensive, and respecting other people's ideas. So communication, if you say communication, say, yeah, that's easy. I can communicate. But it's more than that. It's being a good communicator, right? Especially in a team setting. So for example, if your teammate in the meeting starts berating your code, right? And it's very easy to sort of get flushed and be defensive. So those type of situations, working in a collaborative environment, very, very important. Work ethic, very, very important. So again, a lot of people ask us, what does it take to get a job? How do I get a job at this particular company? What do I need to learn? Part of it is what you know. Part of it is how hard you work, right? When I talk to employers, the first thing almost that they ask for every time is, just tell me who works the hardest in your program. Just forward me some emails and we'll take it from there, right? It's very, very important. And it's, again, it's a hard thing for us to teach, right? We can't teach you work ethic. Clear understanding of first principles. So again, it's what I hear, at least for the, again, top employers. It's not so much, do you know Rails? Do you know Angular? Right? It's, are you smart? Do you understand the first principles? So, for example, we had someone who got a PHP job, right? And we don't cover PHP in our program. And the reason is because he understood first principles very, very well and demonstrated his work ethic and demonstrated ability to learn quickly. And so the employer was confident that he could probably learn PHP, in a short amount of time. And then finally, the ability to ship quality code and working features. So a lot of people are very smart, but for some reason, very difficult to ship, very difficult to actually launch things into production. And that is also a skill that takes practice as well. So we can work from launch school's perspective. We work on the latter two, and you can also demonstrate your work ethic in the program. Right? Communication is a little tougher for us to teach, but it's something that comes out during the assessments. So in the assessments, we'll hop on a phone or Skype interview with you. And we'll also note down your communication ability, right? All these things matter to some degree. But of course, from a teaching perspective, launch school is definitely focusing on teaching technical knowledge and teaching you how to ship code. So we have 6 major teaching philosophies. And I'm going to spend some extra time here just because these are important enough that I feel they differentiate us from most other programs. And these philosophical values have a consequence with regards to how we built the curriculum and how your experience in the program, or how you will experience the program. Okay, and I want to, for example, some of it, our program might be boring. I mean, it's not going to be that exciting all the time. But there's a reason for that, right? So again, one of the most important values that we espouse is focusing on fundamentals. So we say fundamentals first, fundamentals throughout. So we lead with fundamentals like programming and Ruby, right? We don't lead with a framework. And then there's fundamentals throughout the program. We remind you of the importance of the basics. And this is kind of boring because nobody wants to learn how to do little exercises in a programming language. And it feels kind of pointless, right? I just want to build an app because that's what I really want to do. I want to build a portfolio for employers. Let's do that. Let's not, waste our time with the details of the programming language. But that is actually the most important thing, right? Our program at Launch School is extremely backloaded. Our advanced phase is 500 hours of advanced content, and it's all amazing. It's building applications, test-driven development, working with APIs. It's all these things that you see job descriptions asking for. You say, let's just go learn that, right? But you can't do that unless you have very, very strong fundamentals. So it's really important to sort of do the boring work, do the repetitive practice early on, so that when you get to the advanced side with all the knowledge and projects that employers are looking for that are interesting and fun, that makes programming interesting and fun. You actually understand what's happening as opposed to just copy and pasting. Very, very important. The second value in our program is a focus on learning things that don't change. So the software industry seems like it's in this constant churn. Things are moving so fast. There's so much innovation going on. But if you ever talk to a senior developer with, let's say, 20 plus years of experience, you'll sort of see a calmness about them, right? There's no worry. It's like, oh, learn Angular? Okay, not a big deal because it's yet another front-end framework, right? New things come and go all the time. So if you think about the software technology stack, it's sort of an olive shape in that the churn is in the middle layer. The foundations don't churn, right? Basic programming constructs don't change very often. And then the middle layer is all the frameworks and the libraries. There's a new one every day. And then at the bottom of this olive shape or pear shape, if you will, oval shape, is best practices and design. And that doesn't change very often either, right? So what's changing is this body in the middle. It's this libraries and APIs and things like that. And what we say is don't learn that. Unfortunately, in our field today, everyone learns that first. And so it feels like there's so much just activity. And it's just the industry as a whole searching for the right solution to these problems. Different companies are facing different problems, different applications are facing different problems. So we're all searching for the right problem for that particular scenario. So we all invent libraries and frameworks to address that particular problem. So that's why there's all this churn, right? But what are we using to invent those libraries and frameworks? We're using fundamentals, right? We're relying on best practices. We're relying on our knowledge of things that don't change to build these libraries. So as a beginner, don't learn the libraries, right? Learn the things that don't change. The third value in our program is learn to proficiency and not just awareness. So I was talking to a student the other day and he said, I just can't finish the prep course. And I said, how come? He said, it's just too boring. It's just like you're kind of talking about the same things over and over. And I was like, so are you expecting sort of a new topic, then a new topic, then a new topic? He said, yeah, that's sort of what I was expecting. That would be more interesting. You should think about that. But if you learn that way, you are only learning to awareness, right? And I always give an analogy of trying to learn about any topic that is difficult. If you watch a documentary on that topic, you're aware of it, but you are not an expert in it, right? If you want to become an expert in it, it does take a lot of repetition, a lot of practice, right? So it's not just here's a new topic, and then here's a new topic, and then here's a new topic, and here's a new topic, because by topic 10, you'll have forgotten everything in topic 1. So focus on learning to proficiency, not building awareness, right? Not watching a documentary on a topic. That does not make you an expert. Learn to understand problems, not solutions. This goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where solutions are frameworks. Solutions are frameworks and libraries. It's not too important to understand that or to learn that because that's someone else's solution, right? Understand the problem firsthand, and then you have far greater insight into why this solution was built this way, right? So if you learn Rails, for example, why are the decisions that David Hansen made or whoever made, the committer made to Rails this way? Why is it that way? And if you don't understand, then you don't understand the problem. What you've done is you've adopted the solution because it's there without understanding what problem this solution solves. The consequence of trying to learn to understand problems is that you have to feel pain firsthand, right? You have to feel the pain of the author of that solution faced himself or herself. And that requires experience. And nobody wants to feel pain, right? Everyone just wants to build apps. But that's how you learn the problems. You say, wow, this is really cumbersome, extremely manual. I cannot believe that people would do this. Oh, well, in fact, somebody else had this thought and they built this library. It's like, oh, that's great. Now you understand. Now you understand why. As opposed to saying, here's this library, does this. Okay, I'll just use it. Right? Big distinction there. It's an aha moment when you understand the problem. So in order to sort of fulfill these first four values, you have to learn slowly. If you're in a rush, if you are time bound, then you're going to reach for shortcuts. You're going to just reach for the solution. You're going to not need to learn the proficiency just to awareness, just to hack together a solution, right? So must learn very slowly. And it just requires a lot of time if you want to learn a professional level, right? And again, repetition is key. So we have this other value of learning in a circular fashion. So it's not learn Ruby, learn Rails, learn Angular, check, 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 right? It's by the time you get to the advanced phase, for example, a lot of that knowledge when you first started launch school will have just evaporated. Must come back to it. And that's normal. So launch school, we've divided launch school sort of into two sections. The bulk of it is the courses. The courses are 4 phases itself. Preparatory phase is free, and if you've never coded before, this phase will be pretty intense for you. And I suggest taking a lot of time here, maybe several weeks, right? Because you'll need as much sort of preparation as possible to get into our real courses. And some people are caught off guard by this and a little surprised. And, the reason is because our courses, we're trying to move you forward. We're trying to, teach you to a professional level proficiency, right? And that's hard. That takes a lot of, there's a lot of knowledge there that we have to transfer over and a lot of exercises and all that. So definitely need the right amount of preparation. And in the prep phase courses, we walk you through that process. So start that ASAP if you haven't already. Very, very important. And by the way, if you find it difficult or if you find the format of the prep phase not to your liking, then it's also an opportunity for you to check us out, if you will, right? And if you don't like that, you probably won't like the paid courses or the real courses. It's an opportunity to see what we're about without having to pay anything. And then further, we have 3 sort of paid phases with a lot of courses in them each. So the backend programming phase is about mastering your first programming language, right? We use Ruby. Understanding what object-oriented programming is, right? And developing your problem-solving logic and debugging skills, right? So a lot of that, a lot of repetition. And then finally, teaching web development from the ground up or from first principles, right? Trying not to use a framework. We'll use a very lightweight framework, but nothing heavy. And the focus there is going to be on core web development concepts like HTTP and SQL, right? Not on how the framework works. Similar philosophy on the front end, focusing on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, a lot of people will say, hey, I already know HTML and CSS. I'll just say our front end course on HTML and CSS is different, I think. It explains it to a much greater depth. And then, obviously, a lot of JavaScript, right? A lot of JavaScript. And finally, what client-side MVC means. This is what all these frameworks are trying to do. Ember, Angular, React. They're all, some variation of client-side, not necessarily MVC, but client-side framework, right? So understanding and learning about client-side MVC will set you up to understand any other front-end framework in the future. And then finally, the advanced phase is really where the most of our meat of our content is. And unfortunately, it takes a long time to get there, right? This is where all the fun stuff is. It's about 500 hours of very advanced professional skills and workflows. See, a lot of questions are kind of geared towards that phase, but it takes a while to get there. And then we have the process that we want you to take it in is take it in sequential order, right? The order is important for us because we assume that you've passed the assessments and there's a certain level of baseline knowledge we expect you to have. each step of the way. Even if you have a lot of experience, or even if you're a professional programmer today, we don't want you to skip anything. But you can go through the courses much faster and get to the assessments much faster. So as long as you can pass the assessments, you're good to go. And if you can't pass the assessments, you have to stay in that area for a while, right, until you pass the assessment. So the assessments are quite serious. They're like mini job interviews for us. We take them very, very seriously. So they include exercises, code challenges, plus a phone interview where we ask you questions and watch you code. And the idea here is to treat these like a mini job interview, right? So by the time you finish the Launch School courses, you'll have gone through at least 6 of these, giving you a lot of practice. And also, we start to develop a very good idea of your capabilities and the boundaries of your knowledge and ability. So we make a pretty big promise, right, on our front page. And that promise is only possible, right, if we can somehow ensure that you understand. So we have this, we used to call this career services. Now we kind of change the wording a little bit just to make it more clear. We have this Capstone Mentoring program, and it's an optional component of Launch School, and it's meant for you to do after you complete all the courses and assessments. And again, you don't have to, right? And this is the thing with our program, is that because it's so long and in depth, you can actually get a job at various points in our program. Again, there's no sort of singular bar for a job. So it's pretty common for people to finish, just the backend phase, for example, and not even go to the advanced phase and get a job. So if you finish the entire thing, you'll be very, very job ready. But if you want to, you can take advantage of the Capstone Mentoring after that, where it's an intensive one-on-one mentoring program, 40 hours a week, nearly full-time, right? It's still going to be asynchronous with a lot of, Skype and phone calls and things like that, but it's not like 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. necessarily. But it's something like 40 hours a week, right? 30, 40 hours a week at minimum. And the idea is that this is where we can really sort of coach you up into building some capstone projects or guiding you to work on something that's truly impressive, that'll make you stand out from anyone else. We're not doing an upfront cost for this program. We're asking for a percentage of first year salary. And the idea is that we're going to invest time in you first, right? So we're going to work with you nearly full time. And so our interests are aligned. So we have an entire FAQ on our front page right now. So if you want to read about it, you can. My advice is don't worry about this too much, because first of all, it's optional. Second of all, it's a long ways for most of you if you're not already in the advanced phase. It's like 6 to 10 months away in the future at minimum, right? So don't get too caught up in this, but this is something that we're doing just to help people sort of close the loop. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what Launch School is about, right? The journey is long, but definitely attainable. But it's not a short journey. Don't take shortcuts. That's so tempting, right? That's so tempting. Oh, Meteor came out. What if I learn Meteor? Can I get a job real quick? You probably can, right? Again, there's no bar. You probably can. You probably can get a job with a little bit of HTML and CSS too, right? But you want to try to get the best job possible. I'll give an example. In our program, we actually have a lot of people who are working professionals. And the reason why they're learning with us is because they realize that at their job, it's not giving them the best learning opportunity. You might think that learning on the job is the best way to learn. Hey, you get paid and you get to learn, right? I don't think that's always true. In fact, it's usually the opposite, because unless you have a really good employer or manager, because they usually do not give you a lot of time to start from the very beginning, right? It's usually, hey, we have this Rails project. I know you don't know Rails or Ruby, but can you learn it real quick? You're like, yeah, that's great. I wanted to learn Rails for a long time, so yeah, it's a great opportunity. But guess what? You're on the hook for fixing bugs or building features very quickly. So pretty soon you're going to be hacking at the project without really understanding things, without learning from first principles, right? Without taking your time to learn Ruby and web development really well first. Because you have a list of bugs that you have to fix, or you have this project you have to maintain. And that's I see that so often with front-end frameworks as well. Hey, we have this Angular project. Oh, that sounds great. I get to learn Angular. But if you don't learn JavaScript first, it's kind of hacking at it until something works and there's no true understanding. So we have a lot of these types of people in our program who want to learn from the beginning. Almost, they always come and say, I want to learn the right way because I've been just messing around and I don't really understand what's happening. So I want to encourage you to have an eye towards the long-term horizon, right? Not 2 months or 6 months or a year, right? Think about 10 to 20 years from now, because we have that mindset when we build our curriculum, right? It's really about trying to learn things. Now, things always change here and there, but trying to focus on things that don't change. Problem-solving ability is not going to ever be less in demand, right? It's never going to decrease. Being a clear communicator is never going to decrease in demand. Being a hard worker, being able to figure things out, right? So learn things that don't change to a proficient level. That's the key, right? Don't learn things that change quickly to an awareness level. That would be the opposite of what we're trying to do here. And finally, I'll end it here with some studying tips. Habits over enthusiasm. This is really important. I think a lot of people are very enthusiastic and excited and motivated and inspired when they come in. I think that's a good thing overall. However, that is not going to carry you through our program. Enthusiasm will carry you for a week or two. Build habits. Code for 2 to 3 hours a day every day. It'll be painful at first, but over time it'll just be natural. It'll just be like, you have to make time for lunch. You have to make time for this. Right? So the most successful students that we've seen are people who have been working consistently. I've very, very rarely seen people stop for a year and then come back and finish strong. That's very rare, right? I get emails all the time from people who signed up years ago and say, oh, I stopped and I want to start again. Is that okay? So yeah, sure, that's okay. But there's people who started 6 months ago who are now working professionals in the field. And it's not about desire, because everybody you talk to is very, very enthusiastic and the desire is there. The habits are not. The second thing is having a growth mindset over a fixed mindset. If you've never heard this distinction before, I think it's very important to have. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, I don't want a job at Google because I don't think I'm smart enough for it. And I was like, I don't know why you would ever say that. And I think that's a fixed mindset, right? A fixed mindset says there's this level of intelligence I can never acquire, I can never get to. Now, okay, that might be true for certain things. I'm not going to say that's not completely true. Like if you want to be a theoretical physicist at Harvard or something, that might be hard. But having a growth mindset is really, really important. Understanding that as you learn more, you get better, right? If you want to call that smarter, that's fine. But you get better. It's not that your capabilities are set at this level and you can only perform to this level. It's that you actually get a lot better over time as you learn more. As you develop the habits of learning, your brain changes and you get better at problem solving. You get better at debugging. It's not just acquiring knowledge about Ruby syntax, but you actually get better at logic and problem solving. Third piece of advice is set aside large chunks of time for this. So if you only have 10 hours a week, which by the way is way too little for our program, I believe, but prefer bigger chunks of time. And the reason is because coding it's kind of like intense writing. It requires loading things in your brain before your brain can work on it. Your brain is turning the problem over in your head. I actually think 2-hour blocks is good. So maybe this is not the greatest example. But if you have like 30 minutes, for example, that's just not, you might as well just answer email or something. That's not going to be enough time to probably, load the problem in your head, turn it over, and try a couple different ways to solve it. So chunk your time into, I would say, at least 2-hour chunks. Go slowly. This is one reason why we don't, or why we say we're not really good for entrepreneurs or people who are looking to build their ideas. It's just because they're not patient, right? They're usually like, I need to go put my idea out on the market and see if it works. I don't care about learning the details of this programming language if my product's not going to be successful, right? So our Our philosophy is go slowly. You'll digest things and retain things much better that way instead of trying to cram everything in. Do a lot of exercises. And that can't be overstated enough. Do a lot of exercises. Not just build applications, but exercises. And just keep in mind, the topics don't necessarily get easier. But if you work at it, you'll get better. You'll feel things getting easier, but it's not because they get easier. They actually get harder. But you're going to improve if you do this. And I've seen this happen over and over and over. Now, this sacrifice something is hard, I think, because again, it's the idea of being inspired and enthusiastic about learning to code. It does require sacrifice. 20 hours a week for however long, 6 months, 12 months. That's no joke. That's going to eat into your life in some way or another. And it's going to eat into family time. It's going to eat into, exercise time or TV watching time or, work time that you can get paid. And so we realize this. And so it's important for us at Launch School when we create this curriculum to make sure that what you're learning is useful for you. Right? So we're asking you to sacrifice something. A lot of times it's family, and that's not good. But, I can say with confidence that if you put in the time, it's going to be worth it in the long run. It's going to be worth it. If you're serious about a career in this field, it will be worth it. Okay, so learning like short-term things to awareness, that's not worth it. Watching a video on how the latest node works, I feel like that's not worth it. That's wasted hour. Because, if you don't know JavaScript, what's the point? But yet, that's how most people spend their time, their learning time. Lastly, is just trust the process. We've done this for many years now, hundreds of students. I would say the number one thing that I see for our good students, right? So our good students, even they get distracted by sort of the newest thing. And I'll try to follow up months later and say what happened. Like, oh, I decided to learn like the latest Ember. Like, why'd you do that? It's like, I don't know. I thought it was like really interesting and went off and okay, now I'm back, right? Not that those are necessarily bad. It's just, it's easy to get distracted, right? Especially if you notice maybe perhaps a shortcut. Like, oh, this employer is looking for Ember. I'm going to go learn Ember real quick. And so that may work to get you a job at some point in time, but in the long run, again, 10, 20-year career here, right? In the long run, learning things from first principles is, in my opinion, still the best way to learn. So just some quick study tips. All right, that's the extent of this talk. Let me see, I got some questions queued up here. Is a degree essential to finding employment as a software dev? Oh, I had a different question here where somebody asked what's the difference between what we do and a computer science degree. So I would say because of the different types of companies out there, there's not a one answer to this, right? Some companies will demand a college degree, and I would say especially the larger companies. But smaller companies don't care, right? You have to be good though. It's not so much do you have a degree or not. It's how good are you. Now, if there is a company that does require a degree and you don't, you can just ignore that company, right? So is a degree essential? I would say no, it's not essential, but there are companies that will require a degree. So, like for example, a launch school, like we hire people, for example, a college degree is not required, but being awesome is required, right? Do you recommend finishing both backend and front-end prep first or backend? We recommend backend and then front-end. Backend is harder and requires more knowledge. And I think you'll find the front-end easier if you do it that way. Whereas if you do the front-end first and then you do the backend, I think you might have a more jarring experience. But if you know that you want to be a front-end developer, only a front-end developer, for example. So we've had people take the front-end courses and just stop. That's okay too, if you want to do that. Would it be okay, reasonable for myself, for someone like myself with zero coding experience, to expect a 9-month investment, I guess, versus let's say 19 weeks of mini coding bootcamp? Yeah, if you have zero experience, it's going to take more than 6 to 9 months, I believe. I mean, to the degree that we want you to be proficient in, again, different levels, right? We set the bar pretty high. If you want to pass all the assessments in launch school, I expect it to take much longer than 6 to 9 months. But again, I think that's okay. What other field can you become a professional in a year? Nursing, accounting, lawyer, doctor. I mean, there's no field that you can go and start $60,000, $70,000 per year, within a year with zero experience in that field. Very rare, right? So give yourself some time. Go slow. It's not a race, right? Make sure you understand the foundations, I guess, is the key. So if you learn fast, great. It could be 6 months. However long it takes for you, I would say just stick with that, right? But in general, I would say if you have zero experience, you got to plan for a year or two, maybe. Yeah, the 19-week or 9-week or 12-week programs out there, I don't know. I don't know to what degree of proficiency they're requiring you to be at, right? It maybe their bar is a little bit lower, and that's fine. Do assessments change, or are you doing the same one again and again? The assessments are different for each throughout the curriculum. So assessment 149 will test the courses before it. Assessment 199 will test before it. There's a couple assessments in the advanced phase, and everything before it is fair game, including front end and back end. Because if you're going for a job interview, it's not going to, the questions they ask you is not going to be contained to object-oriented programming, for example, right? I mean, anything on the map is fair game. JavaScript, SQL, right? Ruby, APIs, I mean, anything, right? And that's the process we want to mimic. So by the time you get to your first real interview, hopefully you'll have done something similar before. Will launch school help find a job if you're not in the US? Right now, the answer is no. I will say if you go through the curriculum and you're extremely impressive, maybe that might change, because the more impressive you are, the easier it is for us, right? Well, so let me just back up and say the Capstone Mentoring is a different thing than Will We Help You, right? The Capstone Mentoring is a very unique and special program. In general, we will always try to help you, right? If we have a connection we can refer you to, if we know somebody, we will always try to help you. Especially if we have something good to say about you, right? If you did really well in the assessments and you did really, really awesome on the projects, then we will help you, right? So outside the Capstone Mentoring, right? The Capstone Mentoring is a completely different program besides just like Will We Help You. But in general, we'll do our best to help everybody. The more awesome you are in our program, the more ammunition you give us to use, right? To vouch for you. That makes sense? Jordan, I like to relate learning how to play a sport. Michael Jordan didn't become a professional 1 year, therefore became... Right. Yeah, it just takes more time for me. Right. I think the time thing is, everybody asks about the time thing, and this is I think a legitimate question. So it's very hard to answer for several reasons. The first reason I already said, which is there's no bar. How long does it take for me to transition to get a job? That's a loaded question from a lot of different angles, right? One is there's no bar for a job, right? It'd be easier if you said, how long would it take for me to pass the SAT or pass the MCATs or something, right? Or get a 25 on the MCATs. That'd be a much easier question to answer, because at least there's a test we can look at. And there's practice exams, right? You can just keep taking the practice exam to see what score you get. And second of all, everyone's different, right? The variance in people's backgrounds and learning abilities. And this is why I say take your time. People are in such a rush nowadays, and I think quality suffers. The quality in the software development industry suffers as a whole when we produce what we call junior programmers who don't know fundamentals, right? And this is why I challenge everyone to think about a long-term horizon, right? Don't think about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. If you're really serious about a career, think 10, 20 years, right? Is Rails going to be around in 10, 20 years? I don't know. Does it matter? No, not really. Why does it not matter? The reason it doesn't matter is because you understand the problems, not the conventions. You understand the problems that Rails solves, right? Rails 5 is coming out soon. Suppose they change the way something works. Does your world blow up if that's the case? No, it doesn't at all. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, they just took a different approach this time to solving this problem that I've run into. It's a different library, or it's a different syntax, right? That's how you get to be centered as a software developer. Does age matter in industry? Oh, this is a good question. I'm a few years from 50 and have been concerned how it might be perceived in industry. That's a really good question. So ageism is a problem, as is sexism. But every team is different, right? Every team is different. So every team within a company is different. How do you deal with it? That's tough, right? But I'll say in our program, for example, there's people that are well over 50 and have taken our program and are now working professionals in the field, right? I guess being a software developer, there's just such a wide range of options for you to deploy your skills. You can be a freelancer, you can be a contractor, you can work for a wide variety of companies, right? From very conservative companies to very cutting edge companies, and in a wide variety of industries. So, my advice there would be to pick an industry and company that values your experience, right? But I would say, especially in the startup industry, where I'm more familiar with, I did see that. But my thought is, I don't think you need to be overly concerned about it, just because, again, the options for software developers. Let's say you can get there, right? So the question is there, what about ageism? But let's say you can become a good junior software developer, and you're a great communicator, and you're a great, worker, and all those things are applied to you. Then you will have the option to avoid those companies that exhibit that. I have some other questions I got from emails. I can keep going here. So we're running out of time. I can keep going here, but if you want to drop off, go ahead and drop off. But I'll cover some of the more interesting questions I got, and it'll probably take another 10 minutes at most, I would think. But if you have any other questions, keep putting them in here, and I'll address it. So a question I got like 3 or 4 times is, can I start launch school if I have no experience? The answer is yes, you can start, and you should start at the preparatory phase, the free phase, and you should really take the advice we say in there to heart. And I believe we ask you to read like 2 other books, or do the exercise in 2 other books besides our introduction to programming book. So in other words, we're almost asking you to do like 3 different books or resources before paying us anything. And you're like, wow, why? If I do that, wouldn't I be a programmer? And the answer is maybe, right? Maybe some companies will hire you, but again, at launch school, we're aiming for the top employers, right? And so in our opinion, you're just barely starting the journey there, even if you go through 2 or 3 introduction to programming books, right? But it's possible for you to land a job even at that point, just because the variance in what employers are looking for is all over the place. I also got a couple of questions where do I start if I already have experience? Like I'm already a programmer in like C++, been doing engineering for many years. For launch school, you still have to start from the beginning. Our assessments is our way of doing quality assurance and making sure that you understand the fundamentals. So if you already have experience, a lot of these assignments you can just go through pretty quickly, like how to debug, how to think logically. I mean, you don't need to worry about that, right? I've also noticed that we've had several lawyers go through our program, at least that I know of, maybe more. and they do amazing just because the logical part of it is second nature already. So if you already have experience with anything in the curriculum, you can go through it faster, but you still have to go through it, and you still have to take the assessments. So you can maybe take the assessment much faster, right? So instead of 6 months, maybe you can do it in 2 months, or maybe 1 month. I don't know, right? But just pass the assessment and you're good to go. I got a handful of questions about being a freelancer as well. So I want to eventually become a freelancer. Will launch school prepare me for that? So this is a hard question for me to answer because in my opinion, being a freelancer is very, very different than trying to get a job as an employee at a company, because the primary skills of a freelancer are not technical in nature. Right? If you ask me, the number one skill a freelancer should have is marketing and client pipeline management, right? Making sure you have a consistent flow of inbound clients. Project management is really important, right? Coding is important too, but you can almost hire somebody to do it if you're good at the other things. So freelancing, will launch school prepare me for freelancing? I want to say from a technical perspective, it's going to way overshoot the technical requirements of a freelancer, way overshoot it. But it won't prepare you for the other side of it, which is how to manage your clients, how to use agile methodology or Scrum to manage client sprints, perhaps, or how to do marketing for yourself, things like that, which I think are more important as a freelancer. Next question, how is launch school different from an in-person bootcamp? So the biggest difference, obviously, is that we don't have a hallway to walk around. You can't walk, and it's a lonely experience at launch school. It really is, and so we're trying to mitigate that with webinars, with live sessions, and things like that. But it does there is some requirement for you to sort of be proactive in participating, right? It doesn't look like it, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes at launch school. There's people, we don't bump into you in the hallway, but there's a lot of activity. There's people around all the time. So if you ever feel lonely, or if you feel like, oh man, what's going on? Is anybody around? The answer is probably always yes. You can just shoot an email or something like that, and set up a call, or hop on a live session. We'll have a live session later today, right? So I think, from an experience perspective, that's the biggest difference, right? The in-person bootcamp environment is great. Now they have to rent a big space in like downtown, and so it's pretty expensive. A lot of cost involved with that setup, and so the students have to pay for that experience. For us, it's an online experience, but we don't have a building, we don't have air conditioning fees or anything like that. So it's we're able to pass on that cost savings, right? So there's trade-offs. The other side of it is that because we don't have a physical space, there's no limitation with regards to how many people can be in the building. And so we actually encourage people to stay as long as possible and to, learn things well, right? However long you need. In an in-person bootcamp, I think there's this incentive to kind of, get you out the door, because the room can only facilitate a certain maximum number of people. And because we can have you for a longer period of time, our curriculum reflects that. In other words, our curriculum is much, much deeper than most in-person boot camps come close to, right? If you look at our advanced phase, I mean, that pretty much blows any in-person boot camp out the water. And again, there's a reason for that, right? The reason is because we can have you around for a long time. How is launch school different from a mentoring-focused online program? So there's a lot of other mentoring-focused online programs. I think learning with a mentor is always better than watching a video, but it's also more expensive, right? And also, I feel like a lot of these other mentoring programs, you meet 3 times a week for 30 minutes or twice a week for 30 minutes. I don't know what that does, right? It's still 99% on your own, right? Those are what I call piano lessons. So if you want to learn how to play the piano a little bit, you have an instructor come teach you once a week for an hour, right? But if you want to be a professional pianist, I mean, you have to practice on your own. So the vast majority of time is still on your own. On top of that, we have our Capstone Mentoring program we save for the end. And we save it for the end is because we feel like we can really do very, very high impact mentoring at that stage when you're already very competent and you're already basically job ready, right, for the top jobs from a technical perspective. We can really kind of blow it out of the water with some high impact guidance at that level, right? In the very early stages, it's you're kind of learning the foundation. It's about practice, really. It's about practice and getting unstuck quickly. So we still have support. We still have TAs. Just from a philosophical standpoint, we don't think that's the best use of mentoring time. And it's expensive. If you don't have budgetary concerns, then sure, hiring somebody to be with you for 8 hours a day is best, right? But in our opinion, we're able to do this at a very, very competitive and price-friendly price point. Do you cover algorithms and data structures? We do in our after the advanced phase, just because not every job requires it. So some people ask this question, but not every job requires data structures and algorithms. And so it's not a mandatory sort of piece of knowledge. If you are targeting jobs that require it, then you should go through it. Is there going to be a replay of this video? This video is going to be recorded, so we'll make the recording available. Is there a maximum time to spend learning every day for optimal? Is there a maximum time? You mean if you spend 12 hours, you might burn out? I would say don't do that. I would say minimum you should do 10 hours a week, and even then I think that's too low. But minimum, if you can do like 15 to 20 consistently, and then during sort of off weeks do 10, that might be okay. Or if you need a pause, that's okay too. But I would just say don't pause for more than multiple months, like 2-3 months. It's so hard to get back. It's just so hard to start again. All right, what version of Rails are we covering? We're covering Rails 4 right now. But like I said, the goal of our Rails course is to deconstruct Rails. It's to teach you how Rails works. And obviously what you can build with Rails, but really how Rails works. So, the version of Rails shouldn't matter. So we're using Rails 4, which is what's released right now. Rails 5 is around the corner. When it comes out, we'll probably revamp it to our curriculum Rails 5. But the philosophy here is focusing on things that don't change, right? So that's the key to Rails. You'll see when you get there. We have a whole sort of section on what we call no magic Rails, where we just deconstruct Rails and just break it down to pure Ruby. Right, so it doesn't matter if it's Rails 5, 6, or 7. Okay, I'm just glancing through some of the other questions here, and I'll pick a couple because we're totally over the time. Okay, I'll end it with this last one. What do you personally look for in a junior developer? So I've been on both sides. Obviously, as a candidate early in my career, I was also a tech lead / engineering manager for a startup in San Francisco, a funded startup, and probably did over 100 interviews, over 100 candidates. And for launch school, again, we interview people too. So I look for proof, right? That's the thing I put here. So let me see here. So the keyword here is proof. It's not just saying that you can communicate well, but it's proof of it. Same thing with work ethic. And so when I interview people, if they understand first principles well, I'm pretty sure they can build stuff, right? And usually when you interview people, they'll send you some links. I built this app, I built that. Okay, that's good enough, right? I'm not going to inspect your Rails code, but I want to understand that I want to know that you have there's clarity in your speech about what's what, right? If I ask you a question, you don't say, like, we're looking at a piece of code together, and I ask you to explain how this code works. You don't say, this thing goes over there, and then that goes over here, right? You're saying the string object is passed in as an argument to the run method, which then invokes a destructive method, right? You're using the right language, and there's clarity in your head, and you're able to communicate that clearly. You're able to communicate that clarity to me, right? That's really important when I'm looking to hire people. So clarity of understanding and being able to communicate clearly, and then demonstrated work ethic. Work ethic is usually through references, right? Through checking references, and also just seeing how productive they are. And that's hard sometimes, because a lot of times they're not on open source, they're working at a previous company. But usually it's that type of understanding that I'm looking for. And obviously, people that you get along with, people that, especially for junior developers, that are not too strongly opinionated, especially when you finish, like if you were to finish our advanced course, don't say something like, I hate ERB now, I love HAML. You don't want any junior developers hating anything, right? And you don't really want to even say, I love this or that. You just want to say, yeah, I can do, plug me anywhere, right? You don't want to say, I love Angular, right? You can say, yeah, I've done Angular. Just because senior developers tend to be extremely opinionated, and the last thing anybody wants are opinionated junior developers, because likely there's already senior developers arguing over, how code style should be enforced and trivial decisions that the team needs to agree. Like, the more important thing is that we all agree on something, as opposed to what decision to make, those type of decisions. We don't need another person with opinion with those types of concerns. So make sure to not have a strong opinion, but be able to just come in and work, right? Hit the ground running, work, do whatever is asked. How to understand large code base. Okay, that's not something I can answer right now. That's launch school. That's the launch school curriculum. I have a CS degree 20 years ago, currently work as a system admin and looking to get back to software dev. I was a dev years ago, but not recently. This program is a good choice for someone like me. Yeah, I think so. I think it's actually really good for someone like you. We have a lot of very, very technical people just like yourself, from, with a double E degree, and we had computer science degrees too, like recent grads from computer science degree, and it complements the computer science degree really well. So the more technical experience you have, the better. Our program is actually not the best for, people with absolutely no experience, because it is very difficult, and we cover things very in depth. That being said, I don't want to discourage people who have no experience, because we have had people with no experience also finish our program and get jobs. But they worked really hard. Easy to say, hard to do. They worked really, really hard. How do you go about reading other people's code to improve your coding skills? This is something we cover throughout Launch School. It takes practice. Lots and lots of time. And lots and lots of patience to read other people's code. Okay, I'll end it here. Any other thoughts or questions or concerns, you can follow up with hello@launchschool.com, and we'll reply. Thank you for attending, and we'll try to do this again in the future, but definitely follow up if you have any other thoughts or questions. All right, everyone, have a good day.